Jung believed that beneath all systems and rules, the only thing that truly matters is the inner lived experience of each person. But for a very rare few, that inner experience is anything but light. Day after day, you still go to work, smile, talk, and interact like everyone else. Yet inside you is an entire world dense with emotions, thoughts, and questions. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I always feel different? Too intense? Too deep? Or too sensitive compared to my friends? In this sea of people, only a very small percentage, perhaps just around 1%, carry such an unusually deep psychological structure. For them, everything holds more layers of meaning than normal. A single sentence, a glance, a small shift in the atmosphere is enough to make the mind tremble. It is both a gift and a challenge. You easily understand others, easily empathize, but you also tire easily and can just as easily feel alone in the middle of your own life. This article is not here to label you as special just for the sake of it. It is an invitation for you to pause for a moment, look directly into your inner reality, and recognize this. Maybe you are not wrong at all. You may simply be carrying a rare psychological architecture of the kind Jung once described. Like someone who can hear a frequency others cannot detect. You were born to perceive more layers of reality, and that deserves to be understood and honored, rather than treated as a burden. Right after this, we'll explore 8 signs that you may belong to this 1% group. Don't skip any of them, especially sign number 8, because it may be there that you find a clue to the light, the direction, and the inner peace you've been searching for all along. Sign 1, multilayered emotional reality. The first sign of the 1% type usually doesn't lie in what you show on the outside, but in how you feel everything on the inside. If you pay attention, you'll notice you're rarely just sad or just happy in a simple way. A casual remark can pull up an entire chain of memories. A message that's been seen but not replied to can touch a very old fear of being abandoned. Joy, for you, is not just joy. Mixed into it are gratitude, worry, and vulnerability. Jung called these inner currents affect-toned complexes, emotional complexes colored by feeling. Put simply, every time you react strongly to something that seems small, it's not because you're too much, but because what's happening now has struck an entire cluster of memories, emotions, and beliefs underneath. It's like plucking one string in a bundle and hearing the whole chord resonate. In everyday life, this shows up very naturally. You walk into a gathering where everyone is laughing and talking, but after just a few minutes, you can feel that something isn't right. No one says anything, yet you sense the awkwardness, tension, or sadness hiding in the air. You look into a loved one's eyes and know instantly that they're not okay, even though their mouth is smiling and saying, "I'm fine." For you, truth lives less in words and more in very subtle movements of energy, eyes, and tone of voice. Living with this kind of emotional structure is like living inside a painting full of colors and details, while many people around you only see in black and white. They might say, "It's nothing. What's the big deal?" But you feel the tiny cracks in the silence, the very slight shifts in a person's tone. You don't just sense something's up. You also feel what it stirs in them, in you, and in the field between the two of you. The problem is, when no one explains that this is a refined form of sensitivity, you very easily turn back and blame yourself. Am I too weak? Why do small things make me think so much? Why can't I be carefree like other people? After hearing "stop overthinking" enough times, you start doubting your own capacity to feel, trying to switch it off or push it down just to fit in with everyone else. From Jung's perspective, that's the moment you begin to move away from your true nature. He once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." For those who belong to this rare group, that pain often comes precisely from emotional depth. You wake up earlier, so you also feel earlier. and see clearly things that others are not yet ready to name. You're not in pain because you're wrong. You're in pain because you're awake in a room where many people still want to stay asleep. If you see yourself as the problem, you'll try to thicken the skin around your heart. But if you look at it the way Jung suggests, you'll see this. Multilayered emotion is not a burden, but an extremely sophisticated information receiving device. You don't just feel for yourself. You also read signals from others, from the environment, from invisible currents moving through a space. What you need is not to shut it down, but to learn how to adjust the volume, to know when to open wide and empathize, when to gently close and care for yourself. What feelings truly belong to you, and what feelings you are holding on behalf of someone else. When you start looking at your episodes of emotional overload with softer eyes, you'll realize that every time your heart reacts strongly, it is delivering data about what you value, about wounds that need healing, and about relationships that need to be listened to more deeply. Emotions stop being troublemakers and become loyal messengers. And then a very natural question arises. If I feel this deeply, can I really live in a just get by kind of way? It is right here that the second sign begins to reveal itself, an almost undeniable need for meaning. You simply cannot accept a life that only skims the surface. Sign 2, need for meaning, not just routine. When you have a multi-layered emotional life, it becomes very hard to accept a just get through the day kind of existence. Somewhere inside, a question keeps rising. What is all of this for? It's not complaining, but a very real hunger for meaning. Jung once said, "Man cannot stand a meaningless life." For the 1% type, this is not just a nice quote. It is almost an exact description of your inner state. If life becomes nothing but duty and habit, you start to wither from the inside. You may have experienced this in your work. From the outside, everything looks fine. Your income is decent and the environment isn't too bad. But every morning, you have to drag yourself to the office, carrying the question, what am I really contributing? Am I living my own life or just repeating a script that was handed to me? The more you try to reassure yourself with, everyone has to work to survive, the more you feel yourself drifting away from something very important in your heart. At some point, you're forced to admit, this job no longer aligns with your inner values. The same thing happens in relationships. You can laugh, chat about random topics, and show up at all the social gatherings. But on the way home, an emptiness slips in. Why do I still feel like no one really touches who I am? You long for conversations that reach something real. Wounds, fears, dreams, honesty. But whenever you try to steer things deeper, many people quickly change direction, joking it off, switching topics, or telling you that you're too serious. In the middle of all the laughter, you suddenly feel lonely. Not because there are no people around, but because there is no real meeting. If you've watched The Matrix, Neo is probably the easiest figure to relate to for this sign. He lives in a reality that everyone else accepts as normal. Yet inside, he constantly feels that something is not right. He cannot ignore that feeling. He searches, questions, and is willing to trade his safety to touch the truth, even if it shatters his entire familiar world. Your need for meaning works similarly. You cannot be at peace with the answer, "This is just how life is." Inside, there is always a part of you quietly asking, is this truly right for me? Is this really worth trading my time, my energy, my heart for? Of course, many people around you may not understand. They say things like, everyone has to work to earn a living. You're asking for too much. Why can't you just live simply and relax a bit? Hearing this often enough, you easily label yourself. I really do overthink. I really don't know how to be content. But under Jung's lens, the longing for meaning is actually a driving force of development in people with a more complex inner structure. Like a tree with deep roots, you simply cannot live forever in a small pot. From Jung's perspective, The need for meaning is part of the process of individuation, the journey of stepping out of the mold of living like everyone else, so you can live more in line with your deepest self. You begin to distinguish what you do because it is expected of you, and what you do because it truly feels right. You realize not every kind of success makes you feel alive, and not every compliment makes you feel proud. What makes you feel present in your own life is often the work that allows you to pour your full emotions, intellect, and sensitivity into something that has real value. This doesn't mean you have to immediately quit everything, change your whole life, or turn yourself into some grand figure. Meaning often begins very small, doing one kind thing that no one knows about, deepening a relationship, creating something that honestly reflects your inner world. Whether the action is big or small, your criteria gradually become clearer. It has to feel true to you. If you ignore this need for too long, your psyche will send signals: boredom, emptiness, exhaustion, and sometimes waves of anxiety or nameless sadness. Jung did not see these states as enemies to be suppressed immediately, but as a compass. Just as a misaligned needle will shake more strongly, your soul trembles every time you move too far from your axis of meaning. When you dare to look directly at these inner tremors, instead of rushing to cover them up, you start to bring your life back closer to what you truly care about. And then another deeper question naturally appears. If I can't live superficially, if I'm compelled to choose what is meaningful, then who am I really? Where do I stand amid all these external standards? The moment you begin asking this, not to compare but to understand yourself, another sign of the 1% group slowly reveals itself. You start to form an independent sense of identity, a feeling of "I am who I am" that is not easily dissolved into the crowd. And that is the next sign we're about to explore together. Sign 3. Early individuality. When you can't live superficially, when everything has to carry some kind of meaning, sooner or later you bump into a very personal question. If I'm not just living to get by like everyone else, then who am I really? Not who am I in other people's eyes, but on the inside, what kind of person am I actually? In Jung's language, this is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming yourself without being dissolved into the crowd. Put simply, individuation is the journey from living according to other people's expectations to daring to live in alignment with your deepest nature, even if that makes you different. Try to remember when you were little or just entering adolescence. While many of your classmates liked the same games and the same easy topics, you were often drawn to things that were a bit off to the side, reading alone, disappearing into an inner world of imagination, asking questions that no one around you seemed to care about. You weren't trying to be special. It's just that what stirred your curiosity was different from the majority. And very early on, you started hearing labels like weird, hard to understand, always up in the clouds. As you grew older, this showed up in your choices. When the whole group easily agreed on an idea, you felt something wasn't quite right and wanted to look more closely. At work, you clearly knew the safe path was to stay quiet and go along. But deep down, a part of you could not accept what went against your values. You might not be loud, but there is always a very distinct inner axis that keeps you from drifting too far away from yourself. If you want an image that's easy to relate to, you can think of Lady Gaga, an artist whose style is almost unlike anyone else's. Her voice, her outfits, her performances constantly push the boundaries, and she's willing to take criticism for refusing to live inside what's palatable to the majority. She once said, "I was born this way," not just a lyric, but a declaration. I am not here to become a more acceptable copy of someone else. You don't need to be as dazzling as a pop star. But very likely, in a quiet corner of your heart, you feel something similar. You were born like this, deeper, more sensitive, less able to pretend. and you no longer want to keep apologizing for it. Jung observed that people who develop an independent identity early on often experience a distinct kind of loneliness. On one hand, they long to belong. On the other, they feel suffocated if they have to betray their true nature just to stay inside a group. He wrote, "A group experience takes place on a lower level of consciousness than the experience of an individual. When you merge into the crowd, it's very easy to be pulled down to a shallower level of awareness, where people only say what's easy to hear and do what's easy to accept. But the deeper part of you, the part that's waking up, refuses to stay that low for long. Because of this, there will be phases where you feel like you stand between two worlds. You no longer belong to the old one, but the new one is still blurry. You change jobs, change environments, loosen some relationships that used to be very close, simply because you can clearly feel that you've outgrown the old mold. Outsiders may say you're impulsive, but inside, you know you're just being more honest with yourself. Seen through a judgmental lens, all of these deviations look messy, but through Jung's eyes, they are signs that your deepest self is insisting on being lived. You can no longer accept being a copy. You need to be the original, with all your fragility and strength. And as you begin to live closer to that original self, another capacity gradually becomes clearer. The ability to sense which direction, which people, which choices are right for you, even when your rational mind doesn't yet have enough data. Jung called that capacity intuition. The next very distinctive sign of this rare psychological type, sign 4, advanced intuition. When you start living closer to your original self, as we discussed in the previous part, another capacity inside you gradually becomes clearer. It's not loud or dramatic. Often it's just a very small feeling in your chest, but enough to make you pay attention. Those are the moments when you tell yourself, I don't know why, but I know. No, there is something you should do, someone you should avoid, a direction you should turn toward. In Jung's language, this is intuition. He defined it as intuition, perception via the unconscious. In other words, intuition is the ability to receive information not through rational analysis, but through a deeper channel, via layers of memory, experience, and patterns that your mind has accumulated, but not yet named. It's as if the backstage part of you is constantly at work, putting pieces together and then sending up to consciousness a single, quiet signal. This is right. That is wrong. Something here isn't quite safe. Here it's easy to confuse intuition with the first sign we talked about. Emotional depth and empathy. These are related, but not the same. In sign 1, your heart is like a microphone picking up every subtle vibration in the room. You feel very strongly. You absorb the atmosphere, other people's emotions, the subtle tensions in a space. That is emotional sensitivity. In this sign, however, something a bit different happens. Inside you, it's as if there is a map maker, quietly connecting the dots and offering you a direction, even when you don't yet have enough surface-level data. From everything you've sensed, you somehow know which way to go. Intuition is like the next step after emotional depth. From layers of emotional data, your psyche creates a silent guidance, like a compass needle pointing to one side. Emotion says, there's something strange here. Intuition continues, and because of that, I should turn left, not right. Think back to times when you met someone new. There was no obvious red flag. They spoke well, behaved decently, and everything looked fine on paper. And yet, inside something hesitated. Not panic, just a low note. Be careful with this person. Sometimes, only months later when an uncomfortable truth comes out, you sit there quietly and realize your first feeling was right. Or in your work, you may have been in situations where every number shows that a project is a great opportunity. Everyone is excited. The plan looks perfect. But the more you listen, the more you feel yourself shrinking inside. You hear how people dodge real questions, how values are being compromised, how everything rests more on spin than on a solid base. From all these small details, your unconscious strings them together and sends up a short message. If I go deeper into this, I'll pay for it. Intuition does not operate in a straight, logical line. If reason is like someone holding a flashlight, moving step by step and illuminating each brick on the path, then intuition is like standing on a hill looking down. You don't see every detail, but you see where the river flows, where the cliffs are, where the ground is stable. You don't have a spreadsheet, but you sense the forces moving underneath the surface of events. Of course, not every school of psychology sees intuition the way Jung does. Boris Frederick Skinner, representing behaviorist psychology, emphasized that most human reactions are the result of learning and conditioning. From that perspective, what we call intuition may simply be a refined habit, formed through countless experiences of reward and punishment. This view is useful in that it reminds us not to romanticize every inner sensation. Many gut feelings are actually just the reflexes of old fears. Jung did not deny the role of learning, but he added another, deeper layer. For him, intuition is not just a programmed habit. It is a gateway connecting you with both the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. It does not oppose reason. It works outside the range of reason, as another language of the mind. There are things you know before you can find proof, because the deeper parts of you have already recognized a repeating pattern that your conscious mind hasn't caught up with yet. The problem is, many sensitive, deep-feeling people grow up in environments that only respect what can be measured. Anything that can't be explained is dismissed as overthinking or superstition. After being invalidated enough times, you may have learned to turn your back on your own intuition. Every time something inside whispers, "Stop," you push yourself to move forward. Every time a relationship gives you that wrongness in your gut, you soothe yourself. "I'm just too sensitive." And so, you gradually lose one of your most important natural protection systems. Unlike fear, intuition doesn't send you into panic. Fear pushes you to run from every risk, including the very things that might help you grow. Intuition is more subtle. It may make you a bit uneasy, but at the same time, it opens a clearer sense of direction. When you look back at your decisions, you'll notice the difference. Choices made from panic often feel rushed and regretful. Choices made from intuition feel deeply right to you, even if they were difficult. For the 1% type, learning to distinguish these two inner voices is a gift. It allows you not to live by the crowd's opinions, and also not to let fear drive your life. You begin training yourself to pause for a beat before important decisions and ask, "What is my deepest feeling about this?" Then you let reason step in to check, organize, and plan. But you no longer let reason crush every signal coming from within. When you give intuition a rightful seat at the inner round table alongside thoughts, emotions, and experience, something very natural happens. You no longer need to ask quite so many people how you should live. You still listen to advice, but your final criterion becomes, does this truly feel right for me? In doing so, you slowly rebuild trust in yourself, a trust that your childhood and environment may have shaken many times. From Jung's perspective, intuition is not some mystical privilege, but a natural function of the psyche when it's allowed to operate fully. In this rare group of people, that function is often especially strong. It lets you move half a step ahead, seeing cracks, possibilities, and dangers while they are still in the womb. The question is no longer, is intuition real? But rather, do I have enough courage to live according to what I know inside? And this is where another paradox appears. The more sensitive and intuitive you are, the less you can tolerate pretending in yourself and in others. You can keep playing a role for a while, but your body, your emotions, and your intuition will not allow it to last forever. That is why the next sign almost always shows up in the 1% group. A powerful need to live authentically, to take off the masks, even knowing that doing so will change more than a few relationships around you. Sign 5. Radical authenticity. When your intuition has become so used to pointing out what is right and what is wrong for you, there will come a time when you can almost no longer keep pretending you're fine when you're not, pretending to agree when deep down you know it's wrong, pretending to fit into an environment or a relationship while inside you something is crying out that it's time to leave. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." It is terrifying because when you truly accept yourself, you don't just accept the bright parts, intelligence, depth, sensitivity, but you also have to look straight at the dark parts, your needs, your limits, your fears, your inability to tolerate falseness, and the things that make you less adorable in other people's eyes. But it is precisely from there that you begin to no longer endure living against your deepest inner sense of truth. If you belong to the group of sensitive and deep-feeling people, you've probably gone through very small but very decisive moments. Instead of saying, "I'm fine," you admit, "I'm not okay today." Instead of laughing off a disrespectful comment, you gently say, "I don't feel okay with the way that was said." Instead of continuing to join gatherings that leave you feeling empty, you allow yourself to say no. On the surface, these may look like ordinary choices, but inside, they mark the moment you start choosing truth over temporary comfort. The character Holden Caulfield in The Catcher in the Rye is an exaggerated image, but one that easily resonates with this feeling. He is almost allergic to anything phony, fake. He cannot stand conversations that exist only to save face or social roles that everyone silently agrees to play. Holden is full of confusion, but there is one thing he cannot do: pretend nothing is wrong when inside he clearly knows that something is off. You may not rebel as extremely as Holden, but you will probably recognize yourself in quiet choices, leaving a group chat where everyone gossips, even though you're afraid of being left out, turning down a social event where everyone seems to be wearing a mask, slowly distancing yourself from someone because every time you meet them, you are forced to perform to keep the peace. For you, an inauthentic environment is like thin air. You can endure it for a while, but you cannot breathe there forever. From the outside, this can make you easily misunderstood as difficult, too serious. You may also have asked yourself, is it possible that I just don't know how to live relaxed like other people? In fact, what you cannot stand is not joy, but lack of honesty. You are completely capable of light conversation and joking around, but somewhere in your life, you need spaces where you don't have to pretend. Without those spaces, you will gradually burn out, even if you still look fine on the surface. For Jung, the need to live authentically is not a moody temperament, but the foundation of psychological maturity. When you dare to acknowledge what you feel, what you believe, and even what you no longer are, you are moving from living as a role to living as a whole human being. This comes with responsibility. Once you clearly see that something is no longer right for you, it is very hard to stay and not feel as if you are betraying yourself. In return, it opens up a new kind of freedom. You no longer have to wear yourself down inside bonds that only exist because of your pretending. Living authentically, of course, does not mean saying whatever you want or revealing everything everywhere. It is the combination of honesty and discernment, knowing who you are, while also knowing where it is safe to open up and who can go deep with you. Most importantly, you no longer force yourself to play roles that go against your soul just to keep everything calm on the surface. And it is precisely at this point that your inner life moves into another phase, when you dare to shed old layers, to accept that some relationships, jobs, and roles have reached their expiry date. You will very clearly experience those psychological deaths and rebirths. Each time you live truthfully with yourself, an old version of you closes, making space for a new, deeper version to emerge. And that is exactly the next sign that Jung paid special attention to. Sign 6. Cycles of psychological death and rebirth. When you start living more truthfully with yourself, as we just talked about, your life rarely moves in a straight line. Every time you dare to speak honestly, to admit that something is no longer right for you, the old foundations shake. Some relationships can no longer hold. Ways of living that once felt normal suddenly become too tight. You're not just changing a few outer choices. Often it feels as if a part of who you used to be is quietly coming to an end. In Jung's language, these are cycles of death and rebirth on the psychological level, not physical death, but the disintegration of a version of I that has reached the end of its lifespan. Beliefs, roles, ways of clinging that once helped you survive now no longer hold meaning. In the death phase, you may feel lost, empty, as if you're standing in a familiar room where all the furniture has been cleared out. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The pain here is exactly that sense of collapse, when the old is falling apart and the new has not yet taken form. Think back to a major turning point in your life. A breakup that made you think you were completely broken, a job loss, a crisis that forced you to re-examine everything. At that time, you might have wanted nothing more than for things to go back to the way they were. But as time passed, you realized you were no longer the same person, and you didn't want to go back either. You understood yourself more, knew clearly what you could no longer accept, and what you needed to live more healthily. That is the rebirth part unfolding after the old shell has cracked. If you belong to the 1% group, these cycles often don't just happen once. You may have shed skins in love, then in work, then in the way you stand within your family, and even in how you see the meaning of life. Each time, on the outside, it can look like loss. Loss of people, loss of status, loss of familiar safety. But inside, if you look closely, you'll see you've gained other things. Self-respect, clarity, a softer heart toward yourself and others. If you want an image that's easy to connect with for this kind of rebirth, you can think of Oprah Winfrey, the world-famous talk show host and symbol of inspiration. She was born into poverty and went through violence and abuse at a very young age. A childhood like that is enough to break a life. But Oprah did not stop at the story of being a victim. Stage by stage, she kept redefining herself. From a girl carrying wounds into a storyteller. From a host into someone who creates spaces for healing. From a person who had once been silenced into a voice that uplifts millions. That's not just changing careers. It's many inner deaths and rebirths. In everyday life, you may be doing something similar more quietly. After a failure, instead of straining to prove your worth to everyone, you start choosing work that feels meaningful to you. After being hurt in love, instead of shutting your heart down, you learn to love with clearer boundaries. After a period of burnout, you stop treating yourself like a machine that must keep running and begin listening to your body, accepting a rhythm that actually fits you. These changes may look small from the outside, but in reality, an inner structure is being completely rearranged. What matters is, you did not shatter completely, even though at times you thought you'd never stand up again. You cracked, you broke, you hurt, but from those very cracks, a new way of seeing life was born. For many people, a crisis leaves only scars. For you, it also leaves depth. The ability not just to endure but to transform through upheaval is a very rare kind of inner strength. It shows that inside you, there is a quiet but persistent force that keeps nudging you toward growth. If you recognize that you have died and been reborn many times like this, try viewing these not just as a string of tragedies, but as seasons of shedding leaves that your soul must pass through to grow. Each time something old falls away, a new part of you is born, and gradually your presence becomes deeper, warmer, less judgmental. People around you often feel safer with you, safer to be honest, to speak about their own dark nights. From here, another sign of the 1% group slowly reveals itself. A transformational presence, the kind of presence where simply by you being there, others already feel lighter and clearer about themselves, even though you never set out to be anyone's savior. Sign 7. Transformational presence. After several inner rebirths, something subtle begins to happen that you may not have noticed yet. You don't just change the way you live with yourself. The way others experience you also changes. Even without trying, you gradually become someone people find easy to be around. They don't quite know why. They just feel that next to you, they can breathe a little slower, lower their guard a little. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." For those who belong to the 1% group, encounters like this happen quite often. A conversation that seems ordinary on the surface, but when it ends, the other person feels a little clearer about themselves, and you also understand yourself a little more deeply. Have you noticed that many people around you tend to choose you to confide in? Colleagues come to you when they're tangled up inside. Friends tell you things they don't share with the larger group. And sometimes, even someone you've just met starts talking about very personal matters after only a few exchanges. You're not doing psychology in any professional sense. You're not preaching. You're not trying to fix them. What you mainly do is be present. You listen. You ask a few sincere questions. You don't rush to stuff the space with cliché encouragements. Yet, it is precisely that space that allows them, perhaps for the first time, to dare to be honest with themselves. From the perspective of Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychologist, healing power lies in 3 elements: empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard. When someone feels that you are not judging them, not trying to mold them into a better version, they begin to look at themselves more gently. On this level, you don't need to decode the unconscious. Simply being a genuinely present human being already creates change. Jung agreed on the importance of relationships, but he added one more point. People who have a deeply transformative impact are often those who have gone through and integrated their own shadow. They know what jealousy, hurt, failure, and panic feel like. So they no longer panic when they see those things in others. It is precisely this experience of having hit bottom and risen again that helps them become the kind of person others trust, not because they are perfect, but because they are real and have been there. If you find that you are often the place others come to lay down some of their burdens, recognize that this is a gift, but also a responsibility. It shows that your presence has become transformational, not just being there for the sake of it. And exactly when you realize that you can touch others this deeply, a very natural question begins to grow inside you. If I have this capacity, what was I really born to do? That question leads directly to the final sign, also the quietest one, a sense of an inner calling, a mission that is hard to name, but has never stopped resonating within you. Sign 8, sense of unnamed calling. When you have walked through all the layers, deep emotions, hunger for meaning, independent identity, intuition, authenticity, rebirth, and transformational presence, something very natural begins to appear. The question, what am I really here for, is no longer a passing thought, but becomes an undercurrent that is always present in your life. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." For those who belong to this rare group, looking inside is not just an inner hobby, it is a way of living. You may have a life that looks fairly stable by common standards, enough income to live on, an acceptable job, and relationships that are not too bad. Yet deep down, there is still a feeling that is hard to name. I am being called to something more than this, but I don't yet know exactly what it is. That calling is usually vague, but persistent. You are drawn toward things that benefit more than just yourself. You want to create some kind of value, a project, a type of work, a space, a piece of work that helps others live more truthfully with themselves. Even if you don't have a big plan, every time you think about using your depth and sensitivity to contribute, your heart warms up in a very particular way. From Sigmund Freud's point of view, stories about mission can sometimes be another form of unresolved desire and conflict. Humans want to feel important, so the unconscious creates the idea of having a mission to cover the need for recognition. This way of understanding is not at all unreasonable, and in fact, it helps us look at ourselves more honestly, keeping us humble so we don't rush to declare every special feeling as sacred, as a beautiful coat for an ego that wants to stand out. Jung does not deny that dimension, but he adds another layer of meaning. He believes there are experiences of calling that do not arise only from personal desire, but from the process of individuation. As a person lives more and more truthfully with their deepest nature, the collective unconscious seems to speak through them. The two perspectives, Freud's and Jung's, do not cancel each other out. They help you examine your calling from multiple angles, staying clear-eyed about your motives while also honoring its spiritual depth. Not everyone can feel this kind of calling. The fact that you repeatedly ask yourself, "What was I born to do?" is not a sign of confusion, but a sign that you have already gone quite far on the path of inner growth. At some level, that calling is your inner map, quietly guiding you away from a life lived on autopilot, toward a life that is conscious, directed, and infused with soul. And precisely because of that, what matters is not to hurry to slap a label on your mission, but to learn how to listen to it every day in your small choices. As you gradually allow yourself to live closer to that calling, a new question will arise. No longer am I rare, but with this particular psychological structure, how can I live in a way that doesn't burn me out, yet doesn't betray who I truly am? If you see yourself in many of the signs above, remember this: you are not too much. You simply belong to a very small group of people whom Jung saw as the pioneers of consciousness, those who go first in depth. You are like the light of dawn, appearing quietly. Not everyone notices it right away, but a new day cannot begin without it. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Your journey may involve more collisions and bruises than most, but it is also the journey that brings you back to your own inner nature, deep, sensitive, and clear-sighted. Choose environments and relationships that nourish that depth, instead of forcing yourself to fit into places that only make you smaller. If needed, don't hesitate to seek companionship through books, communities, or professionals, so you don't have to carry everything alone. And especially, if sign number 8 resonates strongly with you, listen to it. That calling may very well be the next doorway in your path of growth. Now it's your turn. How many of these 8 signs do you recognize in yourself? Share your own journey in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and send this content to those you feel are so much like you. They might also belong to the 1% and have never dared to believe it.